afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Van Ostren, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Research Design and Librarianship, sponsored by SAGE and featuring Marie Kennedy, Franz Abarillo, John Jackson, and Lisa Zielinski. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. Along the left-hand side, you will see a chat panel that you can use to submit questions or comments. Please feel free to use this feature throughout the program. And above that, you will see a separate box for technical difficulties if you experience any of those, and our production team can troubleshoot them privately. And finally, please note that today's program will be recorded, and all registrants will receive follow-up instructions on how to access the archived version. And now for some background on today's speakers. Marie Kennedy is the Serials and Electronic Resources Librarian at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, California. She's the IRDL Project Co-Director. Franz Abarillo is a reference and instruction librarian at Brooklyn College City University of New York. His research focuses on how immigrant students use academic libraries. Franz has finished his first IRDL project on foreign-born students and is writing up the results. He is preparing to start a second project with an IRDL fellow in the second-year cohort that focuses on how graduate students and faculty use mobile devices for teaching and research. John Jackson is the reference and instruction librarian for Wardman Library at Whittier College. His current research examines the values that undergraduates place on the knowledge practices outlined in the new ACRL framework for information literacy for higher education. Lisa Zielinski is the Carnegie Mellon University Library's Research Data Specialist. As part of the Scholarly Publishing Archives and Data Services Division, Lisa consults with faculty to identify data literacy opportunities, develops learning plans and tools for data education, and investigates and develops programmatic and sustainable data services for the libraries. Her research experience focuses on research data management education and literary principles, integration of data services into the research process, and assessment and impact of data services and activities. And finally, today's event will be moderated by Brownie, editor of online library products for SAGE. At this point, we're ready to get started, so over to you, Brownie.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm really thrilled to be moderating this session today. To introduce myself, I'm Brownie. As you just heard, I am the editor for SAGE Research Methods, which is SAGE's online research methods platform. I have a PhD from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, so I have a bit of background in what academics are looking for when they're doing their research project. So a very quick agenda so you can see what we're focusing on today. I will speak very briefly about SAGE publications. I will then be directing some questions to our librarian scholars about their research projects. They will then each speak about their research projects for about 5 minutes each. I will then follow up with some further questions. And lastly, we will open the session up so that everyone who is listening gets the opportunity to ask some questions. And I know you have a chat box there, so we'll be moderating that as we go through. So if you have any questions, pop them in the chat box and we'll draw on them at the end of the session and hopefully answer any questions that you may have. So firstly, if I can speak very briefly about SAGE publications. As hopefully many of you know, SAGE is the world's leading publisher in research methods, publishing more than 1,200 books and journals across qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods, as well as statistics and evaluation. In addition to books and journals, SAGE has invested heavily in the creation of digital resources to support the teaching and practice of research. Our flagship online resource is called SAGE Research Methods. This website links to over 175,000 pages of SAGE's renowned book, journal, and reference content. This content is further supported by expert videos, search and discovery tools, and a range of options to share and save resources. The SAGE Research Methods Suite also contains 2 specially commissioned collections produced exclusively for online publication. These collections further support students, faculty, and librarians in their understanding and practice of research methods. SAGE Research Methods Cases, firstly, is a collection of over 500 case studies of real social research, written by researchers themselves and explaining the realities of the research process. I like to call this the warts and all approach. This is where researchers tell us exactly what happened in their research, what went well and what went not so well, and therefore students can read these cases and begin to understand what happens when a research plan meets research reality. The cases are structured around learning objectives and conclude with discussion questions, so that makes them perfect for classroom or library use. Our second unique specially commissioned collection that we have recently added to the SAGE Research Methods Suite is SAGE Research Methods Dataset. This collection is designed to illustrate data analysis in practice. Our datasets are real data drawn from large-scale research projects. The data is cleaned and prepared in order to provide usable practice material. This is coupled with clear instructional guidance in order to demonstrate a range of data analysis techniques. So now that I've introduced some of the exciting products that SAGE is working on, I want to speak a little bit about how SAGE has always worked closely with our partners in academic libraries. We've always recognised the leading role that librarians play in providing faculty and students with the best possible resources. In addition to that, librarians encourage best practice in the creation, dissemination, and archiving of academic knowledge. And of course, as we will hear today, in addition to the librarian role in supporting research, librarians are also producers of research. Obviously, conducting research is an integral part of academic librarianship. And what we're going to talk a little bit about today is the Institute for Research Design in Librarianship, which was created by the Loyola Marymount University William H. Hannon Library. In the course of this seminar, we will hear from participants of this intensive 2-week crash course in research methods. I will be asking them questions about their own experiences of research in order to draw out some key tips on research design. In addition to answering my questions, the librarians will describe the projects they've created using their new skills and offer insights to inspire you to conduct your own project. So hopefully that sounds exciting and sounds like something that you're very interested to hear about. So I'm going to jump straight in, and I have a question right up front for Franz. So just to remind you, Franz is our reference and instruction librarian at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. So Franz, just to jump straight in there, can you tell us a little bit about when you first got hit with the research bug?
Thank you, Brownie. The research bug first hit me the first 2 years of my job at Brooklyn College. The librarians in my department teach, staff a public services desk, and do collection development. So as a newish professional, I really felt that I had to do research in some systematic way that I could make observations about my work with my students and faculty in order to improve our services. And as a practitioner, I really felt that I had to work from data, not just intuition, because at the time I didn't have a lot of professional experience as a new librarian. Also, the kind of research I learned in graduate school at my linguistics program was so specialized. I needed to learn the kind of research methods that people use in organizations to evaluate programs and services. So that's about 2 years ago, I think, when I first got hit with the research bug.
Thank you very much for that. That's really interesting. Now, you'll notice we have a couple of polls going on the screen at the moment. So please do, if you're listening in, take part in those polls. Interestingly, one of the poll questions at the moment is asking how confident you feel in your use of research methods. We're still collecting the data, but it looks as though around 50% of you feel somewhat confident in your own use of research methods, which is a great opportunity for me to ask Lisa a question. Lisa, did you learn about research design in library school?
I did learn a little bit. We had a course, basically it was research methods in information science. Very generalized course where in the class we developed as a group, so we broke off into different groups. We developed a proposal for a research project. And in that we developed a research problem and a methods. What are the goals of the study? But we did not actually conduct the research, nor did we get a whole lot of really guidance and fine-tuning in our program on that research. So I would say it was really just more of like a high-level introduction to what types of research methods might be used in library and information research.
Thank you, Lisa. Perhaps now I could turn to Marie. Marie, can you perhaps tell us a bit about why there isn't a really specific focus on research methods at library schools? And moving on from that, can you tell us a little bit about the origin, the history of IRDL, introduce that to us, and perhaps draw on some of those ideas, the things that you were trying to teach librarians through this intensive course?
Sure. So we read Lily Luo's 2011 article about the role of research methods education and saw that of the 49 American Library Association accredited LIS degree programs with online information about their requirements, 60% list research methods as a required course. And in a minute, I'll post a citation to Lily's article in the chat box so that you all can reference that. But we know that LIS degree programs have to address lots of topics in a short period of time, and some choose to put research methods in the forefront, and some don't, due to what are valid and sometimes competing priorities. So we're feeling the impact of those decisions as our library culture is turning to be more focused on making decisions based on evidence. So something like having exposure through a research methods course for thinking about how to systematically and intentionally gather data to answer a question is very helpful in today's environment. But let's say you did take a research methods class in library school, but that was like 5 years ago, and now you're in the profession and you're ready to conduct research in your job as a librarian. You've likely forgotten most of what you learned in that class and need some kind of a refresher or first-time learning, depending on your situation. Where do you turn for something like that? And that's where IRDL comes in as a continuing education component. So I'll tell you a little bit about how IRDL came to be. Here, let me see if I can paste that citation into the chat box so that we can get, yeah, there's the citation for Lily Luo's article that I just referenced. All right, so the design of IRDL. In order to get caught up with the literature, when I moved into academic librarianship from medical librarianship, I started reading all of the journal articles I could get my hands on. And almost immediately, I noticed kind of an uneven quality of those articles, of how the questions were developed or even like which methods were selected. I noticed that some of the articles were well written and others weren't so great. And I wondered why that may be. And at that same time is when we learned about the training issues at the LIS level. So I thought, well, what can we do about this? And I scoured the internet for continuing education courses in research design and found that there weren't really any out there specifically for librarians in the United States. So I brought this to Christine Brancolini, the dean of our library here at Loyola Marymount University, and we decided together to look into it further. We designed a national survey to gather information about academic librarian research, and based on the responses, we talked about how we wanted to respond to our findings. So I'll paste a citation about that survey in the chat box in a minute too. So what we decided to do with our findings was to design an immersive learning experience for practicing librarians that would teach the components of research design, which would hopefully increase confidence in conducting research, as well as building a social network of like-minded peers. We partnered with the San Jose State University School of Information and our regional consortium, the statewide California Electronic Library Consortium, and we applied for a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We were awarded a 3-year grant to build it, so in 2013, the Institute for Research, Design, and Librarianship was born. So we're now in year 2, and we're having an absolute blast running the program. So before I turn the mic over, let me go ahead and paste in a citation to the article about, so based on the findings of this article, IRDL was born.
That's great, Marie. Thank you for that. Just a reminder to everyone that there is the chat function in the bottom corner of your screen there. So if you have any particular questions for Marie on IRDL or for any of our speakers as we go through, please do remember to pop your question down in the chat box. It's great to see some of you already participating in that, telling us about your own research experience. So moving on, I want to get a little bit of a feel from our librarians on the line here about how often they find themselves conducting research at their own libraries. So Franz, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how frequently you yourself conduct research.
Thanks, Bronya. Sure. I think I do and think a lot about research all the time now after I've done IRDL. Lately, I've just been focusing on identifying the different kinds of information that I get in my email box, the different usage statistics and PDA stats, and of course, listserv emails, that cross my path on a daily basis. Personally, I think all of this information is like a puzzle where I have to sort of figure out which research methods complement the different kinds of data that my institution already produces. So for me, on a daily basis, I'm always looking at, wow, that's very interesting chat reference data. I wonder, what's that saying? And I wonder how we can sort of puzzle or complement, other pieces of data to tell a better story about our services that our institution provides. So that's just sort of a little snapshot of how I approach research on a day-to-day process.
John, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, like Franz, I think about research methods all the time. In fact, many of us from the IRDL Institute sort of joke that we've all become method snobs, in that we constantly analyze the research that is out there and think about ways that it could have been done better or more efficiently. But in terms of actually doing research myself, I don't have as much time as I would like to spend doing research. I work at a small institution where many of the librarians wear many different hats, and it's often difficult to sort of take the time out of our day. I mean, especially me, I actually live in a bit of a fishbowl of an office where I'm in the center of the library and I'm constantly getting interrupted. But when I am able to make those few hours a week a priority for doing research, I'm usually able to do those during the slow times of the year and the slow times of the day. But as many people who are on the call probably know, when you work at a small institution, sometimes quick and dirty assessment is all you have time for. So it's nice to have some dedicated time for long-term longitudinal research.
So the feeling I'm getting from the conversation so far is that research is very important to you as librarians, but it's something that you perhaps don't always have the concentrated time for. And also looking at some of the comments in the chat box, there's a little bit of lack of confidence about what research methods people might use, what difference between a formal research method and a research approach is. So these are all issues that we can definitely delve a little bit further into as we go through this session today. So Lisa, could I perhaps ask you, we've established now that research does happen in libraries, that librarians are doing research. Do you think, Lisa, that the need for librarian-conducted research will continue to increase in the future? Is this something that we should all be investing the energy and effort to train librarians to feel confident to do their own research?
My answer to this is absolutely. I've been seeing a lot of revisions to appointment, reappointment, promotion, tenure guidelines to include a higher percentage of their requirements to include research. And I can continue to see a need and a move towards this evidence-based decision making. So I definitely see that there is more of a need. There will continue to be an increase. So there's definitely that need not only for the research, but to train librarians and get them up to speed on how to efficiently and effectively do this kind of research, or do any research.
Excellent. And hopefully we'll have a few more comments in the chat about people's confidence levels in doing research and the sorts of things that they would like to learn. So if we could just move the conversation briefly back towards the IRDL. Marie, could you tell us a little bit more about how you would assess your first 2 years of the program?
Sounds good, Bronya. So the long-range goal of IRDL is, it's pretty simple, where our intention is to increase the quality of the design of research projects conducted in the field of information and library science. And so all of our assessment activities have had that goal in mind. Our activities to reach that goal are focused on 4 essential things. One is to deliver group instruction in areas needed to complete the research design for a project identified by each of the scholars. And that curriculum came directly out of the responses from the national survey we did, identifying what librarians felt they needed to know in order to conduct research. So the second essential thing was to create a workshop environment in which the scholars can share their draft research proposals with the other participants as well as the institute instructors. 3, our goal is to foster an environment of collegiality and support in the research process. One of the barriers to conducting research that we identified in our literature review that was also confirmed by our survey was when you're conducting research, it can often be a lonely process. And so having a social network of people who are doing similar things, having that support is really essential. And then 4th, our goal is to encourage the dissemination of research through publication or presentation. And so after the scholars have completed the 2-week workshop at LMU, we have monthly check-in sessions where we talk about things like, where are you publishing? Where are you thinking about submitting a conference presentation? So to assess all of those goals or those activities, we put together an assessment team to help us determine if we're meeting our goals. Our advisory board has been essential in guiding us along the way too. SAGE took notice of what we were up to and sponsored us in 2015 by providing our scholars the textbooks we chose for our curriculum. So we feel like we're in great company and on the right track. And I think you'll get a sense of that when you hear what Franz, John, and Lisa have been up to with their research projects.
Thanks, Marie. And thank you also for a little mention of SAGE support there. It's great to hear. I think Sage would very much agree with you that learning from others and sharing the realities of research is a key part of building a strong research community and building your own research skills. That is one of the things we've tried to do with the SAGE Research Methods Cases collection. As I mentioned at the top of the program there, that collection very much focuses on researchers writing the story of their research. So what went well, what was a challenge, in language that is easily accessible, that other researchers and students and early career faculty can read and digest and understand. So often sharing your own reality of research is a fantastic way to teach research. So with that in mind, we're going to turn now to our librarians and ask them to tell us a little bit about their own research project. So if I can turn firstly to John, please. John, if you would like to tell us all about your Crossing Thresholds research.
I would be more than happy to. So I am looking at the new ACRL framework for information literacy, and the impetus for my project sort of arose from these two very essential questions. One was the need for an assessment tool, and a lot of librarians have already been talking about the need for creating assessment tools and that work within the context of threshold concepts. How do you measure this nebulous idea, for example, information has value, especially given the fact that by definition, threshold concepts are supposed to be integrative and troublesome. Those are the words that Meyer and Land used to describe the concepts when they first developed them. Threshold concepts are more akin to tacit knowledge than explicit knowledge. So, a student who exists upon a spectrum between, a total lack of understanding and a full level of understanding could offer a wide range of responses to the question, does information have value? And none of these responses would necessarily be more correct than the other. And furthermore, how can we even tell if the answer is actually evidence of real understanding and not just a socially or academically acceptable answer? So that then led me to my second question, which was, how do students actually value these threshold concepts? If we could answer that question, then we could determine best strategies for designing a threshold-based approach to information literacy in the classroom. So in order to figure out how I could measure how a student values an information literacy concept within the context of threshold concepts, I'm using a methodology called vignettes. These have also been called factorial studies, but that's more of a quantitative approach to this particular method. But basically what I do is I've created fictional stories that outline a typical undergraduate research experience. And I read the story to the student and ask them to respond as if they were giving advice to the student. So they're not actually putting themselves in the place of the student. They're offering insight into what they think the student should do. So it's an opportunity to study normative material, which is often really difficult to capture if you were using more direct questioning methods. For example, if you were using a direct questioning method in an in-depth interview or a focus group, if you said, what would you do if so and so forth, the student would usually respond in a way that is socially or academically acceptable. So vignettes offer a way to sort of step beyond that and get into more normative material. And you can investigate things like perceptions and attitudes and beliefs. This is a really great method actually if you're dealing with sensitive material as well. So anyway, I created this fictional story about this student named Jenny, who's an environmental studies major, and she's working on a semester-long project exploring the health benefits or effects of GMOs. And as she progresses through her project, I asked the students question about what Jenny will do or what she should do in specific situations. So it's a series of semi-structured questions that I ask after each section of the story in order to elicit opinions about Jenny's work. So right now in my research, I'm still going through the data, so I don't want to give away the spoilers yet, but so far it's actually been really enlightening in terms of which aspects of the threshold concept students value most and which ones they don't place any significant value on at all. So it's been super exciting. I'm a year into the project, and potentially this could develop into additional sort of spin-off projects down the line.
Thanks, John. That's great. And of course, if you have any questions for John about his project or about vignettes or in-depth interviews, feel free to pop them in the chat box. And John, I very much love the bow tie you were wearing in your little picture there. It is fantastic. If anyone else wants to compliment John on his bow tie, you may also do that in the chat box. Okay, so moving on to our next librarian, we have John up next. John, could you perhaps tell us a little bit about your research?
Hi, it's Franz Brownie. And yes, I would love to speak about my research project that I worked on for IRDL. So my project focused on focus groups of surveys of foreign-born students. I first got the idea because there are so many foreign-born students here at my institution, Brooklyn College, and in our university system, the City University of New York. I felt like this would be a good population to work with considering our institution's mission and location. I also noticed that everybody in the library field focused their research on international students and not students who are immigrants or immigrants who came to the US at an early age and who are now students working in academic libraries. So I saw a gap there which really needed to be filled. And as far as timelines go, I wrote my grant actually about a year before IRDL. I sort of fumbled through it. And then the money was made available to me a little bit after that. And I sort of struggled through the first part of my project for my focus groups before I came to IRDL. That's spring 2014. And I was actually really hesitant about designing the survey, which was the toughest part of my project, I thought, because not only did I want to have focus groups of immigrant students talking about their experiences, but I also wanted to recruit 100 students and survey them about their educational experiences and educational background and their experiences outside the United States. So I was very happy and I got accepted to IRDL, and they helped me workshop my survey, and I was able to prepare that in the fall of 2014 and administer it in the fall of 2014. And I screened about close to 250 students, and I managed to get 93 out of 100, which was my target goal for this exploratory study. So it was a lot of work. IRDL helped a lot. A big part of the work was all those small details that goes into sort of a longer term study. The logistics, the forms, the documentation of consent, permissions, working with different departments, etc. And I guess probably the most rewarding part of it for me was sort of seeing how much work into the research design can pay off. And, quick thinking on my feet was able to produce a decent data set. And I think it's good. I'm happy with it. And of course, now that I've finished my project, I have a very good profile of our foreign-born students as library users. They are multicultural, multilingual, bicultural, have different language preferences when it comes to informations of different kinds, social media, reading for fun, watching movies, and surfing the internet. And of course, everyone expects to learn and work in English when they are in college. But what's interesting is that our students are often transnational, meaning they retain strong cultural ties to their original culture. And it is this cultural aspect of how they view research and university work is what I'm interested in exploring further. So that's about it for my research. Thank you, Brownie.
Thank you so much, Franz. And apologies if I introduced you incorrectly there. I was getting a bit muddled up. Just before we move on there, we do have one question that is specifically directed to you from Francis Chu here in Seattle. And perhaps you could say a little bit about this before we move on, which was, what was your reasoning that 100 study participants was the number that you needed?
Oh, for the sample size, I didn't do a power study for that. I just wanted to sort of do a larger demographic survey and just to sort of get the lay of the land to see what the data would look like. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. If anyone would like to follow up on that question, we can pick it up at the end of the session. So I think we've got quite a few questions coming through for you, Franz. I think what we'll do is move on to Lisa and allow Lisa to speak a little bit about her research. But by all means, guys out there, keep the questions coming. We will try and get to them all at the end. So Lisa, just to remind you all, is our Carnegie Mellon University Libraries research data specialist. Lisa, could you tell us a little bit about your research, please?
Sure thing, Bronia. So my research is conceptualizing value of data repository services. One of the things that I noticed a lot was within the library science literature, there were reasons on why faculty or researchers use library repository services. There have been tools that were developed to assess and audit more of like the reliability and the integrity of repositories, but I found that there wasn't a whole lot of information about what the end user's conceptualization of the value of these services in the context of supporting their research and in disseminating their research. So I decided I wanted to look at the perceptions and the behaviors of the end users, which would be researchers, and I'm looking at mostly faculty researchers, but also looking at graduate level or postdoc researchers as well. So I wanted to find out what was their perception of value and compare it to what was in the current scholarly information about library and data repository services. So I had a few questions. My questions were, how do researchers' conceptualizations of value differ from how it is defined in the literature? What are the researchers' perceptions on the value of also linking data publications and research? And finally, how do disciplinary differences influence the conceptualization of value? So my process here was to start with a focus group, and I'm looking at bringing in researchers from disparate disciplines all in the same group. And the goal is, within that focus group, is to kind of do a listing exercise where the group agrees on a list of values and a definition. So they will not rank within that focus group. So getting consensus in the disparate disciplines is going to be a challenge. The second step is to do an interview. It's a follow-up interview, and in that session, they will do a card sorting exercise where they will take the concepts that they described in the focus group. That's where they'll be ranked. So my data then will be to do a similarity matrix on how does each of the researcher rank their conceptualization of value, and also to text mine both the focus group and the follow-up interviews. So I know I'm kind of talking a little bit about this in the future, and one of the challenges that I had with my project was about 6 months after IRDL, I changed institutions. So I'm a little bit behind in data collection, and I am currently working on recruiting now new faculty and researchers at Carnegie Mellon. So I'm still a little bit in the process of doing my data collection, but I'm looking at starting the focus groups in October.
Thanks, Lisa. That's great. That sounds quite challenging, moving institutions in the middle of doing research. Do you think that was your biggest challenge in conducting your project?
Yes. I had just gone through the IRB process at Purdue and had my project approved and had started the recruitment process when I changed institutions and went to Carnegie Mellon. At Carnegie Mellon, I had to go through the IRB process again, and it was a different process. So changing institutions, there were a lot of things institutionally that I had to first also learn. And the second part of that was I then had to establish a network within the campus to build credibility to effectively recruit. So that changing institutions in the middle of a project, not advisable.
Although I suppose sometimes dealing with these challenges allows you the opportunity to really think through your research and revisit all your former thinking, and it must have been quite exciting to get the opportunity to start again, as it were, although I can imagine slightly frustrating as well. But thank you very much, Lisa, for sharing that with us. Again, if you have any questions for Lisa, pop them in the chat box. So I think what I would like to move on to now is talking a little bit about how the research process and your experience of working with the IRDL has impacted or influenced how you do your daily work in the library. Obviously, everyone listening in today and all of you out there, all you librarians, you have your day job to do, and that is obviously you have to balance any research that you want to do along with your day job. So Franz, could you perhaps tell us a little bit about how research and the experience of research has impacted or influenced your work in the library?
Thanks, Bronia. Yeah, and I think I'd like to go back a little bit to what John said. I mean, carving out that time to do research is really difficult, and on a daily level, I mean, for me, research has become, again, something really practical. One of the things that I learned in IRDL is that I had to sort of create projects in bite-sized chunks and sort of build them, build little pieces together, and that my research is limited to the time, money, and resources, I can conceivably put behind, a question that I would like to know more about, what my students are learning, or, how my liaison departments are, doing with a particular resource. So, so I think probably the biggest takeaway for me at IRDL is that not all research has to be grant funded or theoretical. It's really great to learn that as practitioners, we can just work on research that improves our organization, and that there's a lot of pre-existing data already that we can focus on. So again, designing those quick and dirty qualitative and quantitative instruction evaluations, that's one thing I'm doing. And also the research design that I tend to be drawn from is knowing how to, how assessments and evaluations are constructed so you can get useful information out of them.
That's great. And would any of our other librarians on the line want to add anything to that? Because I feel that's probably quite an important point about how participating in research has impacted or influenced your daily work in the library.
Sorry, Brony, I had one more thing to say. I also wanted to say that it's really important for me on my daily work, because I work with different students in different departments, to sort of lead them through how research is constructed. So in a lot of ways, I'm asking reference questions about research. So that's also another way that I work with research on a daily basis. Sorry.
That's a great extra point. Thank you. I think that's so critical. And of course, the more that you integrate with research, the more you can answer the questions that come to you, because you have firsthand knowledge of your own research and your own research project. John or Lisa, do you have anything you would like to add to that?
Yes, I actually feel that it really has impacted and influenced the way that I work. I am always looking for projects, and not projects that I would do, but especially as we move towards this more intensive research environment, there are librarians that I work with and that I have worked with that may get kind of stuck on their own project, and it's like, oh wait, I can help you. I'm seeing this vision. So I really like that my brain is kind of tuned in that way. So in just about everything that I do, it also allows me to work with researchers and really understand what they're going through. So when I'm talking to a researcher about managing their research data, I really have a good concept of what they're going through from the research perspective, and can kind of give them more guidance along their own research. So it's kind of that twofold, both in the libraries and also outside the libraries.
Yeah, and Lisa said exactly what I was planning to say, which is that, I mean, after IRDL, I feel way more confident dealing with quote-unquote hardcore research methods. So as a reference librarian, when I'm at the desk, I have no hesitation pointing students or faculty in specific directions towards specific methodologies, and I can talk about them in competent ways. So in that regard, it makes me a better librarian.
Well, that's definitely a great shout out there for IRDL, and also for taking the time to do your own research and to learn about research methods. It obviously does make you all feel that it positively impacts and influences your daily work as librarians, which is wonderful to hear. So I imagine that you've all stayed in touch since IRDL and have some great memories that you can tell us and draw upon. So John, perhaps you could tell us about how you've kept in touch since IRDL and what your great memories are from the summer workshop.
Well, I think for every cohort, it's probably different. For us, we actually just organically decided that Facebook was where we were going to communicate. And I understand that with the most recent cohort that wasn't their preferred platform, but for those of us who went through the first year, we've stayed in touch through a Facebook group. We used it as a place to bounce ideas off each other, to get advice. We also have, I think Marie mentioned this earlier, we have monthly check-in sessions through a virtual room where we get a chance to talk to Marie and Chris and just sort of check in with everyone to see how they're going. But we also have in real life meetups as well. So like Franz and I got together at ALA last summer, and there's a few of us who are actually in the Los Angeles area. So we've got together for drinks every once in a while just to sort of catch up and see how things are going. And it's sort of organically just came out of where everyone was at, both online and in real life. But in terms of my favorite memory, that's kind of tough. There's two that sort of jump out. One of them is one day we were discussing mixed methods, and so we actually discussed mixed methods over mixed cocktails, which I have to say is the best way to do mixed methods, in my personal opinion. And that was just a very informal introduction to mixed methodologies. But then there was a lot of informal activities afterwards. We did Cards Against Humanity one night. Some of us went out on the weekend, just as a social bonding type of activity. I will say that I've not worked as hard as I did during IRDL since grad school. So that wasn't a pleasant memory, but it was a good memory, and it was rewarding.
I think we all want to come now. I love the idea of mixed methods over mixed cocktails. In fact, I'm going to take that back to my team here at SAGE and suggest that we do exactly that for our next development session. We talk about mixed methods over mixed cocktails. I love that. That is brilliant. We are running into the last 10 minutes or so of the session. So I think what we'll do is jump down to some of the questions that we have from the audience here. Some great things coming in, and yes, please do keep sending your questions. Okay, so one of the brilliant questions that we have here, which is directed to all of our librarians, is what was the impetus or the spark that set your research idea in motion? And we all already know now what kept you going with your research idea. It was the cocktails and the Facebook group. But what sparked the idea for your research in the first place? So Lisa, why don't you kick us off with that one?
Well, I've been working in research data management for several years, and I was always looking for ways to really move and being able to help researchers. And so that was really what sparked my research, was how can I research how to better support research? And so it was kind of this kind of spiral. I knew there was a lot of information out there about the functionality of repositories, but then I really wanted to know a lot about the behavior. And I guess that's really what sparked it. It was just really this internal drive of just wanting to know. in an effort to really further help the people that I work with.
Yes, I think we hear that a lot at SAGE when people are talking about their research project. It's one of the things that we try and put in all our materials, that if you're going to do a research project, you have to have that real drive. You have to really want to know. There has to be a project that excites you and engages you and drives you through. And I think that was really great, Lisa, there. You were sort of saying you were very focused on the outcome. You wanted to know, you wanted to understand that behavior. So what about you, John? What was the impetus or the spark that set your research in motion?
Well, for me, I wanted to be a better instruction librarian, and the more that I can understand the perceptions and attitudes of students toward things like scholarly conversations and information having value and research as a process and those threshold concepts that are outlined by the ACRL framework, the more that I can understand that, the better that I can teach to their specific needs. So for me, it was fulfilling a very specific desire to be a better instruction librarian.
Excellent. And I think we've spoken about that quite a few times in the seminar now, which is all about how if you do something, if you're learning through the practice of doing something, then it makes you better able to impart that knowledge down the line when your students or your faculty come to you with questions. Franz, was your experience quite similar? Was that, what Lisa is saying about being really interested in the topic, with the drive to understand that behavior and want to know, coupled with what John is saying about the sort of determination and desire to be a better librarian by understanding the sorts of things that library users need to know? Do those two things resonate with you in your research?
Definitely, Bronia. I really feel, a connection to sort of the diversity of students we get here in Brooklyn. On our campus, there's about 90 different kinds of languages that are spoken, and we're surrounded by ethnic communities. So definitely, that seemed like a ripe area, to understand the communities where our students come from, and to also understand what kinds of information experiences they're bringing with them, so that we could use those, to scaffold, these new kinds of information that they need for their classes and degree programs.
Okay, that's great. And I hope that answered that question there, which was from Carl. So Carl, I hope that that's given you some ideas about the impetus and the spark that set the research in motion. The next question I want to deal with, I think perhaps might be best directed at you, Marie, and that is, are there any particularly helpful resources about different methodology designs used in library information sciences, and specifically there for beginners? Feel free to cite any SAGE books there, Marie, if you can think of any. I see that you did pop some down in the chat box, so hopefully that will be of use to people. But are there any others that you would like to speak about?
Actually, I would reiterate John's suggestion of reading EBLIP, which is Evidence-Based Librarianship in Practice. That is an open access journal, and they have, it's a really well done journal that's freely accessible all over the world. In addition, I will paste a link to a blog post that has the 4 texts that we're using in IRDL, just in case you missed them in the chat session or in the chat box earlier. There's a link to a blog post which has them all listed for you. So what we think about when we think about research methods in librarianship is that really we're using social sciences research methods. So we can converse with sociologists, with anthropologists, with psychologists, because we're all using those same methodologies. So I don't know. Do anybody else have ideas about places where they would read about methodologies?
Perhaps I could jump in and just say, obviously, SAGE does have a lot of beginners books out there, and if you go on the Sage website, you can absolutely find some resources that may be useful for you. If any of the other librarians want to jump in and mention any other resources, or maybe pop them in the chat, that would be absolutely great. I'm just quite conscious of the time. We only have 5 minutes left. And there's one question here that I think is really interesting, and I would love to get the librarians to answer on, and that is whether anyone working with the research methods faculties at their institution to support their teaching and reference services. So as Marie said there, you're often using sociology, anthropology, social science textbooks, and you're learning to converse with these faculty members. So it would be absolutely great to know if there is any joined up work, any joined up thinking with the research methods faculty at your institution and the research work that you yourself are doing. Perhaps John or Lisa, would one of you like to jump in on that one?
Well, I can just very quickly say that for me, the answer is really no. I work at a small liberal arts college, and research methods is not a high priority in terms of faculty tenure and teaching. So I am somewhat by myself in terms of being a methods geek. There's a few faculty members I get to sort of talk to about it, but for the most part, research is not a high priority.
And Lisa, is it the same in your institution?
Well, we are a very high research output institute, but I have not worked with any research method faculty, so that is a great idea. Excellent.
So I suppose it goes back to that idea of sharing research, sharing the realities of research, learning from others. So I think that's a fantastic question, and a really interesting point is how can librarians represent themselves as being researchers in their own right and work with research methods faculty. It's really unfortunate that we are running out of time because there are so many excellent questions coming through, and I would love to be able to deal with them all, but we are very much coming to the end of our time. So I think I would just ask if Marie has any particular closing remarks that she would like to make about what happens next for IRDL, and then we'll pass back to Jen to do a short conclusion.
Thanks, Bronya. So while we're working on the long-term goals for IRDL, there is another summer workshop to plan. The details about the 2016 IRDL are available on our website. We're going to be making the formal call for applications in November, but you on the webinar, you're getting a jump on your application process. You can visit the website now. All of the information I just uploaded last night in anticipation for this webinar. So thank you for being in attendance with us today.
And I'm fairly sure everyone on the call will be really eager to participate in IRDL now. I want to come. Can Sage come? That would be brilliant fun. I want to do mixed methods over mixed cocktails for sure.
Sounds like a blast.
It does. It sounds absolutely wonderful. Well, I would just like to thank you all for taking part in this today. And just to remind everyone listening, just to do my very short plug for Sage here, just to remind you that Sage is the #1 publisher for the research methods. We have lots of very exciting, very innovative content, and it would be wonderful to engage with as many of you as possible on that content. If you follow Twitter, my Twitter handle is @BronyaSage, and I share lots of information up there about research methods, about the types of products that Sage Research Methods are working on, and there's always lots of exciting things going on. So just to conclude, I'm going to pass back to Jen, who will close the session. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you so much to everyone, all our speakers, and I just want to give you all a virtual round of applause for spending time with us today and sharing some great information. And just as a reminder to all of you in the audience, we have recorded today's program, so please be on the lookout for a follow-up email from me that will include instructions on how to access the archive version. And thanks again to everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session and have a great rest of the day.